Okay. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's Planning Control meeting. Before we go further, the usual request to either switch off mobiles or put them on silent. Moving on to the agenda, apologies from anybody?
We have apologies for Councillor Peck, thank you.
Noted, okay, thank you. Late items to be introduced by the chair? No, I haven't got any. Declarations of interest, anybody? Councillor
Chair,
Holmes.
may I ask some advice? I work, as you know, I work at the trust, the local hospital trust. Application 1. Whilst I don't work directly within this directorate or with parking services, etc., I'd just like to take advice whether I should exit that discussion and decision, or whether I can remain here with an open mind, having my employer be the applicant. Thank you.
Well, obviously it's not a pecuniary interest as such. It's a question of whether you feel that you are sufficiently sort of capable of dealing with this with an open mind, and that depends on your closeness. And so it's really down to you to decide whether you feel that you can approach it with an open mind.
I think I can, Chair. I just wanted to take that advice. If there's any specific legal reason why I couldn't be in the room, I can approach this with an open mind, and I feel very confident I can make a decision accordingly. Thank you.
No problem, Matthew. If you have an open mind, so will we. Item 4, minutes of the meeting held on 17th of February 2022. Thank you. Item 5, minutes of the Conservation and Heritage Advisory Committee, which was held on the 13th of January. Thank you. Item 6, appeals decisions. Ian?
Yes, thank you, Chair. There are 4 items to report, and they're all worth a read. The first one is land rear of 58 Grange Avenue. Permission was sought in outline for a residential dwelling with access and scale details also applied for. It was to erect a dwelling and garage in a linear rear garden, essentially a backland plot. Permission was refused, and the appeal was handled by way of written representations, and the inspector agreed with us in relation to the overall design of the proposal, how it related to the prevailing residential area, and then also the impact it would have on neighbours. So that was a good outcome, that Chair, that got dismissed. Another similar appeal, second one, land rear of 66 Chestnut Avenue, Micklover. Another good defence of residential character and design policy following the refusal of permission for a single bungalow to the rear of this property, which would have been accessed off of the East Avenue frontage. So we had concerns there about how it would sit within the immediate area, and also the impact on neighbours in terms of the close proximity to neighbours and overlooking of the private garden space that would be provided for the proposed dwelling. So that was refused. The inspector was pretty clear on the points there. It's worth a read. So another dismissal. The third one was a split decision, which means that part of it was dismissed, part of it was allowed. This site is in the Spondon Conservation Area, Orchard Cottage, 23 Church Street. Now that was an application we'd refused for the retention of 3 storage containers, so large steel containers that you can see on a container ship, which we use for storage for a temporary period, and also a proposed garden building which was further into the site and slightly more discreet in the conservation area situation. So the inspector gave it quite a lot of thought in terms of the impact on the conservation area, because we have statutory duties under the List of Buildings and Conservation Areas Act, in addition to our planning policies in the development plan, and he allowed the appeal in relation to the garden building, but he refused permission for the retention of the storage containers, which was good. And I think on reflection he probably arrived at a sound conclusion. So on that one it was a 50-50 split. And then the final item, Chair, a retrospective application which was dealt with under delegated powers. It was for the retention of a balcony with railings and access staircase on top of a garage at 27 Prestbury Close in Oakwood. Rather unusual context, but essentially people having a platform on top of a garage which had amenity implications for neighbours in terms of overlooking issues. So the inspector agreed, dismissed the appeal, and then that gives us now, given that it's a retrospective application, we now have the ability to take enforcement action against that. So overall, Chair, 3.5 dismissals from 4 appeals, so that's nearly a 90% success rate. So pleasing stuff, and if members want to have a look at those reports and the inspector's letters, I would recommend that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. We'd settle for percentages like that, 3 out of 4 each time, I think. There was number 7, confirmation of the tree preservation order, number 603. Sarah?
Yeah, this is a group order on the northwest corner of Little Over Lane allotments. We're asking for authorisation for order without modification, and there's been 1 objection from a neighbour.
Thank you.
Just need to move that on, Chair, and confirm that.
Chair, I just got a question on that, because the trees in the photograph, the photograph's very helpful. They're clearly not yet matured specimens. They're all really nice and smart. They're really nice. They're really nice trees as a group. But they're going to grow, and as they get bigger, I can see a point coming where they're going to impact on each other, and means the trees will not be growing in as good a form as they have at the moment, because there isn't the space for them all. So I just wonder what the process is when the trees are starting to cause damage to each other because of their proximity, and whether that could be explained to the complainant so that they are aware of what they could be doing in the future.
Did you want to come back on that, Sarah?
In the absence of the tree officer, all I'd say is if we do grant an order, then any works that are needed to maintain the trees in their good health while they grow would just need a TPO application or consent order application.
Okay, thank you. Did somebody move that, number 7?
I'm happy to move it, Chair.
Thank you. Sorry. All those in favour of that, I've been told we have to have a vote. It's Mr. Teasdale's fault. Any against? No. Right, okay, then moving on to number 8, applications to be considered tonight. The first one of which is pages 1 to 39 on your report. And to tell us about this, I believe, is Ian.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just in terms of housekeeping updates, there originally were speakers on this item, and the public speaker had concerns about potential access from the site onto Owlers Lane, which is to the south of the application site, and also the existence of a substation in that area. And so earlier this week, my colleague received clarification from the agent that no access is proposed onto Owlers Lane, and the substation is not affected by the proposal. Both these elements are covered by conditions 12 and 14 as drafted, and the updated list of conditions was circulated yesterday, together with a letter from the Owlers Lane Management Company. So the speakers who were on the list originally, we've sorted the concerns of the Owlers Lane Management Company, and they will be dealt with by the conditions if members are minded to recommend to grant permission, Chair. In terms of the main report, the important operational need and rationale for this proposal to serve the hospital are included in the report, and the Trust explains that they're required to increase their activity up to 120% in elective procedures to try and reduce the backlog of surgical and diagnostic activity. This requires maximum use of all operating theatre capacity 7 days a week, and inevitably will require more people to come on site. And despite running many of outpatient appointments virtually, this increased during the peak of COVID and will remain for a good percentage of activity the volume of new referrals still awaiting a first outpatient appointment remains very high, and a good proportion of new outpatient appointments still require that initial face-to-face consultation. And so we are now not out of the COVID sphere, but we're now dealing with getting back to more business as usual. And of course, a hospital is a regional facility, and so has quite a base of patients, and so the proposal is a much needed proposition. In terms of its siting, the proposed multi-storey car park is located near to the common boundary of the hospital site, in proximity to residential properties on Constable Avenue, Constable Lane, Queen's Drive and Owlers Lane. And the site currently occupies car park number 6. Both Owlers Lane and Constable Avenue are private roads maintained by the residents of those roads, and so are not public highways. In terms of scale, the proposed multi-storey car park is a split-level 5-storey car park set around 2 access cores with stairs and lift access to all floors, along with the main core at the pedestrian entrance adjacent to the car parking office. The car park would provide 875 car parking spaces. However, in terms of quantum, these are not all spaces, all new spaces on the hospital site, as some spaces will replace those lost or that will be lost as a result of consented other developments. And the table on page 3 shows the net gain of some 301 spaces as a result of the proposed development. Externally, the car park is set within the varying land levels of the site as shown on the elevational drawings. The car park measures approximately 19 metres in height to its highest point and approximately 17 metres to the main bulk of the structure. The footprint covers some approximately 109 metres by 48 metres. Your report addresses all the relevant considerations, Chair. And of course, one of the key issues surrounds the traffic impact of the proposal on the site, internal access system, how it impacts on the surrounding highway network and its capacity, in terms of the hospital's ongoing travel plan commitments for its staff and patients, and also the need for a temporary car parking solution elsewhere prior to the implementation of this development in order to accommodate this proposal. The terms of the Section 106 agreement to secure monies for a wider mitigation scheme for the network are also laid out in your report. Andy's also on hand tonight to advise as necessary, and I'm satisfied that all traffic issues have been fully and properly addressed in the report, Chair. Your report also addresses the relevant environmental components, and Carl is on standby to address any comments pertaining to land contamination, air quality or noise issues. Additionally, work is required to address all the necessary information required for to assess the impact of the proposal in relation to the existing tree stock, and the proposed mitigation programme, which has been negotiated, seeks to secure 3 trees for every 1 removed to facilitate this proposal, and the area to the side of the proposed car park adjacent to the Constable Avenue boundaries is a landscaped area that's proposed and will improve that margin of the site in terms of its landscaping potential. The application has generated objections from nearby residents across a range of topic areas, and these are summarised in your report. On balance, though, Chair, I am confident that the overall scale, design composition and local environmental impact of the proposal has been properly assessed, and it would, in my opinion and judgment, accord with the policies of the development plan when considered as a whole, and I would promote the recommendation as printed and the updated conditions as circulated, Chair, and there are no speakers. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Members of the committee, anybody? Councillor Kerr.
Chair and colleagues, I'm really sad that we're needing to do this because the adjacent roads are already really congested, as it says in the report. And it's not just the roundabout where the City Hospital exits onto the A516, you talk to New Road, It's also the roundabout with the Ring Road. And we've all seen and heard about the problems with the traffic on Kingsway. And a lot of the traffic to the hospital is actually coming along those same roads as we have the congestion with the Kingsway Retail Park. So we have significant problems already with traffic. Now, the other side of this is the fact this is a really important location for people across Derby, and people need to get there. There is a decent travel plan, and I think the hospital has done some good work with their staff to actually reduce the number of people who are driving. But here we're talking about not staff, but patients. And there is more that could be done to encourage patients and visitors to be not driving but using other modes. If you go onto the hospital website and ask about travel to the hospital, the first thing that comes up is how to get there by car. So the message that people are saying is, back of your mind, you're thinking, oh, how do I get drive here? Look up, let's find out. And there it is telling you how to drive there. If you're wondering how to get there and you look on the website and it comes up first with saying there's public transport here, you can cycle here, we've got cycle parking, you can charge your mobility scooter, you're not immediately being told this is somewhere to drive to. But at the moment the message is drive here. And that is one of the things that needs to change. We need to be strengthening the travel plan and the work that the hospital is doing. Because otherwise, this won't be the last multi-storey car park that the hospital wants. There'll be another one on another site that they'll be needing to put more car parking spaces in. And it'll have, again, more impacts on the residential areas around the hospital. So, in my view, we will need to approve this for the sake of everybody in Derby, but we also need to make sure that we're encouraging the hospital to make other modes more attractive. I also think that the scheme as it is at the moment isn't as friendly as it ought to be. Everybody who arrives by car is going to turn into a pedestrian as they leave. I don't know if we can zoom in on the scheme that we've got there, but if we do and look at the main entrance to the car park area, that rectangular block on the left-hand side, there's very little pavement outside it. That's going to be a pinch point where people who are arriving for their 9:30, their 10 o'clock appointment are all going to be trying to get in and out through that staircase. There's very little pavement. We haven't conditioned the closing up of the existing car park entrance, which is again shown on that scheme. And I don't think we haven't got a condition there that says we need to look at the walking routes and make sure the walking routes are as good as possible, even to this car park. We talk about cycling routes, and I welcome those changes, but we haven't got the walking routes in. We've also got very few electric car charging points requested. It's going to be 2 years before this is open. In 8 years' time, every car that is sold in this country has got to be an electric one. So we're going to need a lot more electric car charging than they are putting in at the moment. And even if we're not requiring it to be active car charging now, I think that every location in the car park ought to be one where electric car charging is possible. Not just because people might have come from a distance, but also because the hospital can then use the batteries within those cars to clip their electrical demand, and it'll actually save the hospital something on their fuel bills. There'll need to be a condition, they'll need to write some legal things about being able to borrow power from someone's car to do that, but I'm sure that and the technology will be possible in the next year or two. So that's something else I'd like us to condition, Chair, so that we've got every site enabled for electric charging. But I also mentioned mobility scooters. Where do you charge your mobility scooter? I think we might have covered that in one of the new conditions that we've just had sent round, but I think we ought to have confirmation on that. And again, cycle electric charging we ought to be having included. There is a comment here in the report to say that the county archaeologist doesn't think there's any need to look at archaeology here. Local people believe that Owler's Lane and the route through here is actually the line of the old Wickneild Roman road. And people think,
Can
and I think there ought to be
just
a
say, Lucy,
archaeological...
whilst I like listening to what you're saying, but if we have a report from the archaeologist, then, you know, we should stick to that. We can't listen to sort of what the local rumours or gossip are as to what might or might not have been there.
Well, the county archaeologist will have, may not know as much as local people who live and have researched their streets. Because it's, you know, Owlers Lane, just there on the plan, is believed to be the site, the line of the old Rickneld Road, after which Rickneld Road is named. But a watching brief on a site like this, I don't think would be too much of an arduous condition. Other thing here, we have lighting. I know that there is talk here on terms of the lighting, but I think there ought to be a condition there just to make sure that the lighting that they do end up with is going to be adequate, so that we've got some control over the lighting and overflow lighting into the local areas. And I think that covers all my suggestions that we ought to make sure that we condition, Chair, and I'm happy to go through them again more briefly. But I also have a question in terms of the noise. The comments on the noise assessment doesn't really cover why the noise assessment from things like car alarms and slamming doors is not going to be greater with a higher building and larger number of vehicles than it is in the current situation. And I'd very much welcome some comments on that from the officer. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucy. Good God, it's 9:30 already, just before we know it. Ian, would you like to come back on any of that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll defer to Carl, of course, with regard to the noise issue. Andy may also want to say something about some of the wider parking, the traffic issues. But in terms of the points Councillor Kerr raised, we have condition 8, and these conditions that were circulated are, of course, abbreviated, and we'll flesh out the precise wording after the event. We've got condition 8, which requires condition requiring precise details of the cycle parking, cycle charging and motorcycle parking, and we could extend that to include mobility scooters and car parking and car charging as well. So that's condition 8. Condition 10 looks at condition requiring CCTV to King's Treatment Centre, repairs to signage, variable signage, cycle, motorcycle parking, layout amendments and widening. I'm not entirely sure precisely the full scope of that, but Laura will know. And we could include in that the walking route, the pedestrian priority that Councillor Kerr was talking about. And in terms of the archaeological watching brief, I think we might be stretching it a bit there, Chair, given the competency of Steve Baker, our county archaeologist. So I think we've done the right consultation there, and he's provided his opinion. So I'll defer to Carl over the noise issue.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to have to concede this is one of the reports that I didn't review myself. It was a colleague of mine that reviewed this report, so I'm not aware of the specifics, but I've reviewed his comments, talking about, obviously through planning, we're talking about significant impacts for noise in terms of whether this is something that, you know, is likely to cause an issue for either conditions or refusal. So about certainly the judgment that he made that this isn't going to cause any significant impacts, and I think primarily that revolves around the fact of the current use of the site, that we've already got quite high background noise levels. It's a fully functioning hospital, it has been for many years, and it's already car parking on that site, and we're only talking an increase of about, I think it's 300 spaces for this particular car park. So that, you know, in noise terms, kind of a double, I mean, if you want to put it that way, a doubling of noise tends to cause an increase of about 3 decibels. So if we were doubling the capacity of the parking on this site, that's the sort of general rule of thumb judgment, that it would be an increase of 3 decibels. So we're not talking anywhere near that, and I think that's probably the reason why the impacts have been demonstrated to be not significant on this site. I think as well, and someone may be able to correct me if I'm wrong, but on the high levels of the car park, you have effectively barriers around up to car height. I know obviously you have gaps as well to allow it to ventilate properly, and that's why at the higher levels that you're not actually getting direct line of sight from the vehicles that are driving around the car park and parking, and so you're not getting a huge increase of engine noise because you've got this barrier effectively around the cars, around the car park. That's certainly my interpretation of it anyway, if that helps.
Thank you, Carl. Yeah. Councillor Kerr.
Yeah, just in response to that, sometimes barriers can result in echoes and an increase in the perceived noise, because depending on what they're constructed in. Is the construction of these panels around the car park of a suitable material to absorb rather than reflect the noise?
Ian.
Pass. Don't know, Chair. But we can include it in the suite of conditions, if you like, the clarification of that material. If you see that as necessary, we can do that.
Carl.
Just to add on that, obviously, if we were to condition something along the lines of ensuring that the barriers were absorptive as well as being of a suitable construction to be substantial enough to be able to create the barrier effect as well, obviously that needs to be something that is demonstrable within the noise assessment. It needs to be proportionate and necessary and meet all the tests. So that was the only thing to say on that, and I'm not sure I could make a judgment on that without having a look at the report, but I could certainly, if there was some discussion about that condition going on, I'd happy to do so.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Carl's correct. I mean, we can look at that after this meeting, Chair, and if we feel that it's necessary, we can include it under condition 3, which deals with the external materials. So we could include it in there if necessary, but if not, we'll defer back to you and Councillor Kerr as Chair and Vice Chair and tell you what our rationale is.
Thank you, Ian. We have to be mindful of the fact that this is not a retail park or a shopping centre or leisure facility. It is a hospital, and for those of us that are unfortunate enough to have to go there for appointments or to visit relatives, you can see the queues backing up to Uttoxeter Road on there, people waiting for a car parking space, and hopefully this will alleviate some of that traffic and not affect people who are trying to make their way home from work or wherever along Uttoxeter Road and have to, sit back in queues. And also in the hospital grounds, when the people are waiting for a parking space, engines are idling, thereby creating more pollution. So we have to be considerate of that fact. Anybody else? If not, would somebody like to move it to a vote? Yeah, sorry, I should have said that. Vote with the condition that Ian was saying. Anybody second it? Councillor Holmes, thank you. All those in favour with the conditions? Okay, that's carried. Anybody against? No. Right, moving on to the second one now, which is pages 40 to 51 on your reports. 295, 297 Brighton Road. To tell us about this is Sarah.
Thank you, Chair. This is a proposal which seeks full permission for change of use of a 6-bedroom dwelling house at 295, 297 Brighton Road in Elveston to form a HIMO with 7 bedrooms for 7 occupants. The plans have been amended during the life of the application to remove one of the bedrooms on the ground floor and enlarge the communal kitchen dining area towards the rear. So originally it was submitted as an 8-bedroom HIMO. The only external alteration... Sorry. Is that better? Oh, sorry. The only external alterations proposed are the formation of 3 small windows, 2 ensuite bathrooms on the side elevations, and a new door to bedroom 3. There are 4 car parking spaces proposed to the front of the dwelling, which are currently used for parking. There's a garage at the rear of the property, which is too small for the provision of parking, and cycle parking is proposed for residents to the rear of the property. There have been 8 third-party objections and 1 from Councillor Graves, who will be speaking on the item this evening. Concerns raised are mainly related to insufficient parking for residents, congestion, highway safety concerns, concerns about harm to the character of the area and loss of family housing. In terms of the increased occupancy and parking, the Highways Officer has raised no objections to the provision of 4 parking spaces for the property and is satisfied there will be no unacceptable impacts on highway safety. In terms of the HIMO use, a proposed 7 occupants would be 1 more than a small HIMO of 6 bedrooms, 6 occupants, which could operate in this property as a permitted residential use. The increase in residents to 7 would not be significantly more harmful to the residential character of the area or highway safety in the local area than that of a single dwelling house. The proposed HIMO would provide a high-quality living environment for the future occupants and would not result in any harm to the residential amenity of neighbouring residents. Overall, we consider the proposed 7-bedroom HIMO to be acceptable in this residential location, delivering additional new housing with no adverse impacts on the highway, on local character or on residential amenity. So we feel it accords with the relevant local plan policies as well as the overarching NPPF. So we're recommending for approval with the suggested conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sarah. We only have Councillor Graves to speak on this, so but mind you, you still get 3 minutes.
That won't be a problem, Councillor Khan. Members of the committee, 295-297 Brighton Road. The first thing I would like to address is the highway. I do find it disappointing that our own highways department feels there is adequate parking and that introducing a HMO in this location would not impact the level of traffic or the level of danger in this particular area. The house, a family house, does have parking for 4 car-sized vehicles. To be honest, that space is one of the most awkward spaces as it joins a 4-way traffic junction. This junction is unusual in that it expects all 4 adjoining roads to give way. That in itself does cause some issues in terms of hesitation driving and confusing understanding of how it works. 7 occupants are likely to have 7 vehicles. Even if at sometimes it's not the case, it still has the potential of 7 vehicles. I would like you to consider that Alveston already has 57 officially licensed HMOs and many more that do not fit into the licensing requirements. There are already 3 on Baker Street and 1 on Warren Street just around the corner from this application. Mr. Chairman, I'm once again directing my comments towards you in your public announcement that you feel there are too many HMOs concentrated in small areas of the city. This is the case with this application. Members of the committee, I would like to also point out to you that in 2015, a 19-year-old Ahmed Khan was killed in this very location on his moped caused by blind spotting of numerous cars parked around this junction. He hit a dustbin lorry that had to be in the middle of the road because of the parked cars on both sides of the highway and gave Mr. Khan little chance of avoiding a collision, resulting in his death. Surely, councillors, you must all do what you can to reduce accidents such as these. This application will add to and further exacerbate the parking problems in this street and neighbouring streets. There are already too many HMOs on this street and in this area. As you all know, I always highlight the changes to the community. The current building is a well-used family home, an important amenity to the neighbourhood. To change this to a HMO status further degrades the availability of family homes. Forever homes must always take precedent over transient homes. Through the licence and planning process, you are changing the character of several neighbourhoods. I am asking you to halt that transformation by rejecting this application. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Graves. You don't need to keep reminding me of what I said. It's what I believe in, and we judge each and every application on its merit and not with the area that it's in. Sarah, would you like to come back to that?
Well, since most of the comments are highway related, I'll defer to my highways colleague for any comments on that.
Did you have any comments, Carl? No? No, sorry, touch.
That's all right, Chair. Thank you. I think I'll just refer back to the report, if you don't mind, which I think sums up our position in terms of highways. And it says, as 6-room HMOs are considered permitted development, there is an argument that the only impact that can be considered material is that of the additional rooms. In this case, it's one. It is acknowledged that on-street parking is a premium in this area and that there are nearby parking restrictions on both Brighton and Warren streets. However, the site is in a sustainable location within walking distance to the local district centre and amenities and is in close proximity to local transport links. Paragraph 111 of National Planning Policy Framework states that development should only be prevented or refused on highways grounds if there are to be an unacceptable impact on highway safety. The residual cumulative impact of the road network would be severe. To be clear, severe does not relate to parking, but consequences of congestion as a result of the traffic effects arising from the development, which in this case is one room. Whilst the scheme would potentially increase demand for parking spaces, it would not be possible to argue that the scheme would lead to unacceptable impacts to highway safety. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, referee. I mean, Councillor Graves just reminded us of my thoughts on this, but we have to consider one thing, Councillor Graves, and that is, you mentioned, was it 57 or 67 HIMOs in your ward? There are 137 in mine, and I still believe that we should, wherever we can, refuse HIMOs and keep family homes. But as I said, each and every application has to be looked on its merit. In this case, before I say anything, I'll open it up to the committee members, whoever wants to speak on it before I say anything else. Councillor Prosser.
Okay. If we look at the aerial view that was shown there, it's quite clear that the 4 spaces quoted on the front are not actually big enough for 4 cars. The front door obscures an area in the middle, and you can see on that picture the cars overhang the pavement already. My car certainly wouldn't park on the front. So I think to claim the development already has 4 spaces that are acceptable is probably a very large stretch. I'd also like to draw your attention to 5.2 of the report here, which is quite interesting. It says it shows 8, and I think it's down to 7, isn't it? Entirely self-contained units, 2 of which have their own entrances at the rear. There is a communal lounge, separate WC. But as all the units are self-contained, it doesn't meet the definition of a HMO, as none of the units have to share a basic amenity. Therefore, from our perspective, it would be classed as a block of self-contained flats, not a HMO. Now, this is quite interesting. The valuation office is going around the city revaluing a lot of HMOs and imposing council tax on each room, which means that a HMO becomes extremely expensive to live in, and often these are self-defeating and have to close, or the tenants suffer greatly from a massive rise as they are hit with a massive council tax bill, as the landlords will not cover that. So this development is actually a little bit self-defeating in that it has every potential of being an extremely expensive place to live, with no parking that's suitable on the front, and doesn't meet the building regulations for flats, because it's sort of treated as a HMO, but it's not really a HMO because they're separate flats. It's a very difficult thing. It will not provide cheap housing. It will provide expensive housing of a substandard grade. That's my opinion.
Thank you, Councillor Prosser. Sarah, would you like to come back to that?
Yeah, those comments are provided by our housing standards team who license HMOs and flats. Since we had the plans amended, the property is now an HMO because it has a much larger communal kitchen and dining area. So it is now what you would call a HIMO as opposed to self-contained flats.
Thank you. Councillor Kerr.
I agree with the comments about the parking on the front, and if we look at the aerial view that we had before, you'll see that the adjacent semi, which is still a semi, the car chooses to park at an angle because it doesn't fit square on. And it's not only this image that shows cars overhanging the pavement. The image included by the applicant in terms of their statement also shows 4 vehicles on the front, one of which is very small and one of which is clearly overhanging the footway. We've had problems with, in all our wards, we have people complaining about cars overhanging footways. And I think it's wrong to identify parking spaces as parking spaces if a standard vehicle cannot fit into it. The application that we've just approved for car parking had a standard space for one vehicle to get into a multi-storey car park space. How many multi-storey car park spaces have we actually got for this property? Because I don't think that we've actually got 4 spaces. And I just want to set against that, though, that if they reduce one room in this building, we then have no say over it at all. And the say that I would like to have over this is in terms of waste management and in terms of travel planning. Because we want a property like this is likely to have a number of different people living in it. Most people will not be there for more than a year. And every time the residents change, they will need educating about waste management and about travel in the area. And I think we should have conditions for both those things as standard when we are approving an HMO.
Did you want to come back on anything there, Sarah?
In terms of the parking to the front, you can see it on the Google Street View. Our highways officer did go out and have a look at this when he did his comments, and he did confirm that he was satisfied that 4 cars could park on the front, and he didn't have any concerns in terms of highway safety.
Thank you. Anybody else? Councillor West.
Thanks, Chair. Just because I think it will make it easier when I do vote against it. Just to say that, again, it's another HMO application coming before us in an area that is already heavily impacted by HMOs. My thoughts are, as has been said many times before in this room, that it would have a detrimental impact on the character of the immediate area, detrimental impact on existing neighbours. It would be, where are we? Contrary to policy GD5, it would put increased pressure on existing on-street parking levels, and realistically, as I've already said, would be detrimentally impactful on existing residents. And this is not something that we want to see as a committee. We never want to see people who are already living in an area displaced and inconvenienced by planning applications. It's certainly not been the wish of the committee for the years that I've been on it. I'm very pleased to see that they looked at the plans and took out one of the bedrooms and put in a decent communal living space. That was a positive for me, but everything else is an absolute negative for the reasons that I've just stated. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor West. Anybody else? Okay. As I said at the start, we have to look at each application on its merit. In this particular case, we're looking at 2 semis that have been sort of converted to 1. 6 bedrooms would mean that they wouldn't need to come before us and it would just get licensed. The fact that there are 4 parking spaces here means that they're probably going, way beyond this. It's over 50% in terms of parking. What we've had in the past is houses being converted into 6-bedroom, 7-bedroom, and not having a single parking space at the front. In this case, there are 4, and as I said, from the reports, you will see that there were 2 semi-detached houses that have been converted to 1. So at any time, they could have had 4 or 5 cars there, 6, 7 people living there, and that. So that is the only difference between this and some of the ones that we get in terms of terraced houses being converted or a semi being converted. These are 2 semis, 4 parking spaces, and access around the back for 2 of the flats, cycle parking, etc. So that's the only thing I would say that makes this application different to some of the ones that we just don't want to see. So entirely up to the committee. Anybody else would like to say anything?
Chair, can I just highlight, obviously, in the report is mentioned the previous appeal on 135 Brighton Road, which was allowed. So I think that's obviously a pertinent point just for members to take into account when considering this application.
Which is what I was saying, actually, that we need to look at each application on its merit. And whilst I've always said to you, ever since well, those of you that have been with me on this committee since 2004, that I don't fear anything going to the appeal, but sometimes we have to be reasonable in terms of thinking what are our chances. And bearing in mind what Mr. Teasdale has just told us and the fact that this was two semis, I would leave you to sort of make judgment as to see how you feel about that, and I don't have anything else to add to that. Okay, would somebody like to move it to the vote?
Chair, we're moving with additional conditions on waste management and travel planning.
Is that acceptable, Sarah?
Yeah, I was just clarifying. Bin storage is fine. I think if travel planning is finely balanced given the size of the property, but we can put it on if you wish.
Yeah, I think Sarah's right. Whilst travel plan would be desirable, I think it might be a somewhat disproportionate for the nature of the premises.
We could include an informative note, Chair, instead, on
Right,
travel
okay.
planning.
Okay, with that in mind, all those in favour of the application?
That's 3, Chair.
Right, all those against?
2, 3, 1. That's 3, Chair. So, do you want to exercise your casting vote?
Well, there's 3 each in there.
It's 3 each.
No, there's 4 of them put in.
Sorry, did I miscount? Against? 1, 2, 3. Oh, sorry.
Oh. Oh.
Yeah, so that's refused.
That,
We need reasons for refusal.
yeah. Okay, that application is refused. Would some of you, would one of you rather, give reasons for its refusal?
I'm fairly sure I gave fairly specific reasons, but yeah, detrimental impact on the character of the immediate area and the residential amenities enjoyed by existing neighbours, in terms of associated disturbance and the over-intensification of the use of the dwelling house, would also serve to increase pressure on existing on-street parking levels on surrounding highways, and would be contrary to Safe Policy GD5.
Pretty comprehensive there.
Can we include the inadequate size of the parking at the front? Somebody needs to go and measure it.
Well, you voted in favour of it, Lucy.
I don't mind, Chair. If committee wishes to reject this, I want to reject it on as many grounds as possible.
Well, I think we've got plenty of grounds there. One of you will have to volunteer. Councillor West has got her hand up already.
Want to take a vote on
Yeah.
refusal on those grounds?
Yeah, all those in favour of refusal on those grounds?
5.
6. Okay. Anybody against refusal on those grounds? Sorry, just to make it clear, Mr. Teasdale says we've got to ask for those who are against refusal on these grounds. Councillor Holmes, you can't be for and against at the same time. Okay, that's refused. Thank you. Councillor West. Yeah. Okay. Item 3, pages 52 to 60, 85 Havenbolk Lane. To tell us about this is Ian.
Many thanks, Chair. In terms of housekeeping items, a letter has been forwarded by Amanda Soloway MP on behalf of constituents who are very concerned about potential amenity issues and general concerns about criminal activity associated with the use. We haven't circulated that letter in the usual manner, given its content and some of the personal details included, but I just thought I would relay its general content. On to the main report, Chair. The application seeks planning permission to change the use of number 85 Havenbrook Lane from a dwelling house to a residential care home within use class C2. There are no external alterations proposed as part of the application. The proposed use would provide a home for 2 children between the ages of 6 and 18 years old. Each child would have their own bedroom, and staff would be on site 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and would be suitably qualified. Of course, all qualification criteria and other management issues would be dealt with under separate legislation, such as Ofsted and other providers. The home would not be a permanent residence for staff, but they would be on site 24 hours a day. The applicant has confirmed that the care home will be staffed as per the following hours: 7 in the morning till 10 at night for day staff, with 2 to 3 staff available. From 9:30 p.m. to 7:30 a.m. one night wake staff member alongside a sleep in member of staff, so 2 during the night time hours. And a manager would also be in attendance from 9 to 5. I'm assuming that's the working week, Chair. And staffing can be amended to take account of the individual needs of the child. The application has attracted objections, Chair, and some concerns have also been passed on by the local MP, as I mentioned. These objections are summarised in your report, but as your report states, there are no specific policies which restrict the overall number of care homes that can or should be provided within the city at any time. And separate legislation would ensure that the wider needs of the occupants can be met and the management monitored, for example, through Ofsted and other care regimes. The application site is in a sustainable location so that future occupiers would have good access to services and public transport links in the area. We must also consider that planning permission has been previously granted for the change of use of this property from a dwelling house to a care home for 2 children with associated staff under code number 313304. And that's only a few years ago, Chair, and so since the approval of this application, there have been no substantive change in planning policy that would prompt a different determination. There are no overriding highways or environmental health issues either, Chair. Therefore, in land use planning terms, there are no substantive policy concerns for a use that would be highly comparable to a traditional family occupancy, and therefore I strongly promote the recommendation as printed. And you've got Councillor Lonsdale, Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Councillor Lonsdale, you have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, I have had a speech sent to me kindly by one of the residents who is concerned about this. They say, "Members of the committee, officers and ladies and gentlemen, I would like to state our opposition to the proposal at 85 Havenbrook Lane for the changes of class use from C3 to C2 as an occupant of an adjoining property number 87. Our point of objection relates to the differing environmental protection team reports between this application and the previous one from 2013. The previous environmental health officer stated, "I note that the proposed change of use could create noise which has the potential to impact upon adjoining residential premises. I would therefore recommend that a scheme for improving the sound insulation between the properties is submitted to the local planning authority for written approval before the development commences. The scheme shall be based on recommendations made by a competent acoustic technician. Following the completion of the insulation scheme, validation testing shall be undertaken in line with the procedures outlined in Building Regulations Approved Document E to demonstrate the proposed sound reduction has been achieved. A report of validation testing shall be submitted to the local planning authority for written approval before the development is occupied. The property was constructed in the 1930s and has poor acoustic insulation levels. Even low-level conversations is overheard at the property. I would like to draw your attention to the fact that no modifications has been carried out to the premises in the interim period. Therefore, I feel the 2013 conditions is still valid. However, this has not been identified in the recent application. I would appreciate you giving this condition to the application your attention. I feel that this is an important thing to be thinking about during your discussions now. Having worked in this environment, they can become very loud, so it would help the residents accept it if we would consider it as a condition. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lonsdale. Ian, did you want to come back on anything?
Yes, Councillor Lonsdale's correct that the report to committee last time included that consultation response, and the condition number 4 was attached accordingly. I'll let Carl comment on that, but yeah, that's correct what Councillor Lonsdale's just said.
Carl.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, a slightly awkward one for me to respond to in some respects, because obviously when we respond to these consultations, it's an officer's opinion and it's a judgment, and put simply, I take the judgment that's different from the officer that dealt with this application back in 2013, and I happen to disagree with that judgment that insulation is something that's necessary and reasonable in the circumstances to require. And that's just my professional judgment here. I'm failing to see how a care home occupancy of 2 children can be construed as being anything other than comparable with a normal family living in a domestic dwelling. If anyone that cared to live next door to my house, who I've got 3 children, they'd probably want the insulation installed in between my property as well. But without taking too much lighter point on it, that's my judgment. I happen to disagree with the judgment that was made previously. It's not unheard of to happen. I appreciate that puts out a slightly inconsistent position from our department, because the applications are, for all intents and purposes, the same. Obviously, the committee could choose to attach that condition for assurance purposes, to try and assure that provide reassurance for the neighbours in terms of reducing noise levels. We do attach those sorts of conditions. My only point of caution there would be, again, meeting those planning tests. Is that really proportionate? Is that necessary in the circumstances? I don't necessarily think it is, but obviously the committee may choose to take a different view.
Thank you, Carl. Well, look, I mean, sometimes we have to look at things in a very logical manner. 2 children being supervised 24/7, aging from maybe 6 years old to 18 years old. Are they likely to be more noisy than, sort of a family with a couple of 18-year-olds or 16-year-olds who've got cars and what have you? And, we've approved similar applications in other parts of the city where we haven't asked for sound insulation, and I don't see how we could possibly seem to be reasonable in asking for this, right? With 2 occupants. As I said, the ages of 6 to 18 possibly. We don't know. There could be 2 18-year-olds in there or 2 10-year-olds in there. But I can't see them, generating more noise than a couple of 16, 17-year-olds, bearing in mind that these are supervised 24/7. As I said, sometimes we've got to be sort of realistic in what we ask in this committee. And in this case, my own opinion is that I don't see how we can justify asking for sound installations with 2 people, sort of moving there. Councillor Carr.
Well, you just said most of what I was going to say, Chair. And We've seen some of these recently, so I hope this is some policy change that's driving this, and I approve. I mean, you're quite right. There could be 3 children. It's an ordinary family house. There could be 3 children in there, and if they're all over 13 or 14, the parents could go out. These are supervised 24/7. It's just nonsense. I'll be voting in favour, Chair.
Thanks, Chair. I feel the opposite way. I think if we can make an improvement and justify resolving the concerns by neighbours, then we ought to do it. And I'll be for making the condition for soundproofing. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Kerr.
Chair, I'm also really supportive of improving the sound conditioning between semis. I've lived in a semi and I've heard the conversations going on next door. And I was living next to somebody who was elderly, who had loud conversations with her other elderly friends, probably without any hearing aids in. Kids don't have volume control. They grow up into adults and usually do, but if it's a care home, once that set of children have gone, there'll be another set of children. You'll never go to a point where you haven't got children without a volume control in that property. However closely they are supervised, they can still shout, they can still stamp their feet, they can still bang on walls. The standards we have for building semis now are higher, I believe, than they were in the 1930s. Certainly, there are Derby Homes properties, and I don't know whether this was originally built for the corporation or not, where we now have to consider the insulation value on party walls, as well as the acoustic, the situation on party walls. I think this is an opportunity to improve the situation, and we should take it.
I'd just like to add that this is not a new build. You know, it is a property of sound sort of structure, and most of the older properties are far sounder than the new ones that are being built today, where all they have is plasterboards, you know, backing onto there, and these are sort of brick walls. But I might be wrong, but I can't see for the life of me how we can ask them to put soundproofing in a semi-detached house with 2 children going to be there. Perhaps Mr. Teasdale can give me some guidance, but I certainly wouldn't be, sort of saying, well, yeah, they have to have this, because I don't think it's necessary.
Yeah, I mean, Chair, the only issue I'd possibly say is that I think everybody would be in favour of sound insulation on all properties, whatever, whether it's a family or not. The problem here, obviously, is that, as you, Chair, have said, what is the difference between two children in a care home under supervision and 2 children in a normal family house? I mean, if you are imposing a condition here and not on a normal residential property when you grant it, there is a sort of element of lack of consistency on that point, or sort of justification. But it is over to members, Councillor Kerr has made some good points in terms of supporting the condition, but I think there is still that fundamental principle. Just moving on in terms of advice on forward in terms of taking the vote, and clearly this is the key element of sort of the decision tonight. I think what I'd suggest is, first of all, take a vote on whether you want to approve the application, and if it is approved, then come back to a question of whether you want to impose that additional condition. Sorry, Councillor Kerr.
No, can I just let me finish? Look, as I said, we have to think logically. What happens if they put 4 people in there as tenants? Are we going to ask every house that contains 4 or 5 people, HIMO, that's just licensed, we don't have any control over it in terms of planning permit? Are we going to ask them for insulation? We're opening up a can of worms here, and anybody could challenge this by saying, well, hang on, you've approved certain other places, you never asked for sound insulation there. It just, doesn't make sense to me. But It's entirely up to you. I just don't see how, as a committee, we can say, well, in this particular case, we want sound insulation, whereas the previous ones, we didn't want them. And these kids, even though we don't know who they are, what their ages are going to be very, very noisy, so the neighbours will be disturbed. I think we're just shooting in the dark here. Councillor Cars, rather.
Thank you, Chair. That confusion does happen. I think we should take Mr Teasdale's suggestion, vote on the application and then have a vote on whether we want to impose the unreasonable condition.
Right, okay then. Would somebody like to move it to the vote?
Chair, may I put the contrary view? Because I won't vote for it without the condition. No, because once we voted for it and rejected it,
well, you don't know. I mean, you're assuming that it's going to be. So I suggest we take it in sequence and listen to what our officer is telling us and do what we normally do, and that's to take a vote before we start attaching conditions to it. Okay? All those in favour of the application as it is? Five. You just put your hands up in there to make sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5. All those against? That application is carried. Okay. What additional conditions are we asking for?
The addition.
Thank you, Chair. This is an application for 2 Repton Avenue in Little Over for domestic extensions. Just a bit of housekeeping. We've had 2 further third-party objections received since the committee report was printed, so we now have 5. They raise similar concerns to those set out in the report, so loss of amenity, excessive scale, height, and consider that work's been carried out without permission. The application is for 3 extensions and retentions of works which are partially completed. This includes a single-storey rear extension, an outbuilding in the rear garden, which is the blue square that you can see, and a roof extension to form a flat roof rear dormer. Members may be aware of the history of these applications for single-storey rear extension and the garden building. Permissions were granted in 2018 and 2019, and a subsequent application refused in 2020 when the cumulative scale of extensions was considered harmful to residential amenity. A roof extension and the rear dormer have been built in the interim period without permission. This application seeks to regularise permissions for the extensions and the roof extension, which have been constructed with alterations to the garden room and roof extension to make them acceptable in terms of amenity, visual amenity and residential amenity. There's an existing overhanging roof on the garden building which is now proposed to be removed, and to reduce impacts on neighbouring properties. The current roof extension would be set in by 200 millimetres from the eaves line and faced in tiling to match the main roof material to form a more normal dormer extension. These alterations to the garden room and roof extension as constructed would mean that they are similar to works that could be carried out under permitted development rights. Objections to the application raise concerns about residential amenity and that the works have been carried out without planning permission. Overall, the extensions and alterations are substantial in size, although they do not, in our view, have an unduly harmful impact on the living environment of the neighbouring properties, which could therefore justify a refusal. With the exception of the dormer extension, there would be very little visual impact on the street scene. The dormer, as amended, would be similar to other roof extensions which could be undertaken without permission. So for these reasons, the extensions and the roof extension, we feel, accord with the intentions of the local plan and in the MPFF in terms of their design and amenity impacts. So we are recommending approval subject to the suggested conditions.
Thank you, Sarah. Members of the committee, anybody? No? Councillor Kerr.
The thing that strikes me about this, more than anything, is the amount of hard surfacing we now have across the whole of what was the garden. And I just wondered what the situation was in terms of drainage and potential attenuation of the drainage or the opportunity for doing some sort of sustainable drainage for part of the scheme.
Sarah?
The hard surfacing, I presume you mean in the rear of the property. It's not controlled under the Planning Permission or Planning Act, so we don't really have any control over the drainage that is situation within the rear of that property.
Thank you, Sarah. Jed?
Thanks, Chair. I noticed in the objections there is a comment that the dormer extension is unsafe. Have we any officer's opinion on that, please?
Sarah?
We're not aware whether building regs have looked at it. We've looked at it on site with my enforcement officer, but we were looking at the planning issues and its design and impact on amenity. So I couldn't tell you at this stage whether the current structure is safe or not. That would be down to building regs.
Okay, I'm sure building regulations would have a good detailed look at that. No other further comments. Would somebody like to move it to the vote? All those in favour of the recommendation? Any against? No, that's carried. Thank you. Last item of the night, potential future site visits. I don't know who's going to tell us about that. I'm just so excited to hear. I can't read. Is it you, Sarah?
Just waiting for the joy of the site plan. The first one is it's a revised scheme for Brook Medical Centre for 14 apartments. It's just mainly a different internal layout to what was originally approved.
No takers.
Next one. Most of these tonight are variations of condition, I would add. So this is a variation of condition relating to a location of a post box, which is the red. This one is a new application. It's an outline for 89 apartments with means of access to be approved. 4-storey building, access off Stepping Lane. Yeah, it's demolition of the existing or former office buildings and new build.
Has this been... No?
It's very visible from the street, but my memory is that building, I think it's labelled number 90 there, is actually quite a nice building, or it might be the others. It's nice, brick built with a clock tower or something on it. So I just wonder whether it's something that we ought to, people if they're going past, just have a look and see if you think it's,
Okay,
we
Councillor
ought to be
Kerr.
having a conversation with the applicant on it.
Carry on, Sarah.
Okay, next one, James. Again, this is a variation of condition to an existing housing development, the relocation of a play area. Again, this is a variation of condition in terms of conditions, so pre-commencement to pre-occupation, so there's no actual physical works on this one. This one. Again, variation of condition for materials and house types on the Snellsmore Lane housing development recently approved. Another variation of condition to amend window and door locations on an approved industrial unit. This one is of more interest. This is the university's business school application, which has just recently come in. So I think it's 5 and 7 stories, corner of Agard Street and Ford Street. And that's it.
Visited, Matthew? No, well, if Matthew says we have to visit it, I mean, who am I to disagree? Put that
That's
down,
fine,
then
we
we'll
can arrange
visit
that.
that.
Laura can
I
arrange
mean,
that.
I wouldn't want to offend Matthew. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the night.